At sunset on a Tuesday, the Horizon Star oil platform off the Gulf of Mexico lit up like a flare. Tour helicopters had been ferrying executives from Houston to celebrate a major milestone. Among them was the teenage daughter of a Texas oil CEO who had turned the family name into a household brand across America. She took selfies on the deck, steel towers framed by a pink sky. Down below, a heavy-set maintenance woman in a gray jumpsuit checked gauges and wiring, ignored by the party crowd. She had a U.S. flag patch on her sleeve, the only hint of who she was. Without warning, a violent shudder shook the rig, tossing champagne and people. An explosion tore through a lower pipeline, sending flames skyward and cutting the power. Sirens wailed. Lights flickered and died. The radios crackled with static. The Coast Guard's rescue line rang and rang. Smoke rolled across the deck. The CEO's daughter screamed, trapped behind a twisted door. The maintenance woman tightened her cap and sprinted toward the danger, because she knew this was no accident. Somewhere in the chaos, men moved with intent, and only she had seen them. Everything now depended on her. Earlier that afternoon, Horizon Star looked like a floating city off the Louisiana coast. Drilling crews guided thick mud down a well, welders sparked in the sun, and a catering team prepped burgers and brisket for a celebration. Flags flapped over the derrick, and supply vessels bobbed beside the legs. This rig had just set a production record that company leaders hoped would be a symbol of American self-reliance. Among the guests flown in by helicopter was Trevor Marks, CEO of Lone Star Petro. His high school-aged daughter, Emily, accompanied him. Trevor, a tall man with silver hair and a governor's handshake, wore steel-toe boots over designer jeans to project ruggedness. Trevor had kept her visit off the books. After losing his wife, he guarded his daughter fiercely. Only a handful of executives and security staff knew she would be stepping onto the steel deck. In a pump room, a woman in a gray jumpsuit checked wiring and pumps. Her badge read K. Johnson, electrical tech. Her accent was Texas, and she blended in with the maintenance crew. In another life, she had been a U.S. Navy electrician who crawled through cramped compartments to restore power while under fire. After a mission gone wrong, she left the service and slipped into the world of private contracts. When Lone Star quietly hired a specialist to perform a security assessment before the CEO's visit, she answered. Her job was to prevent accidents and sabotage, but no one knew she was anything more than an electrician. Just after noon, she saw a supply boat tie up and 4 men in clean coveralls board the platform. They carried tool bags and IDs that scanned correctly. To most eyes, they were extra hands from a subcontractor. To her, they moved with coordination. They spoke softly, their glances lingered on cameras and crew members instead of gauges. One rubbed his ear as if adjusting an earpiece that wasn't there. The safety officer chatted with them and let them into a restricted area, but she filed away every detail. She followed at a distance, pretending to check a conduit. From behind a grating, she watched them remove a sensor from a control cabinet and install a black device about the size of a lunchbox. It looked like a piece of monitoring equipment, but its indicator lights flashed in a pattern she'd never seen. She considered reporting the men to the rig manager, but she had no hard proof. Crying wolf could get her sent home. Instead, she walked to a computer terminal and ran a systems diagnostic. One of the communication lines between the control room and the subsea blowout preventer had been bridged. If activated, it could disable the emergency shutoff. She suspected the lunchbox was a wireless detonator. These men weren't here to fix anything. They intended to trigger a blowout and use Emily as leverage to extort the company. She removed a multi-tool from her pocket and started loosening panel screws, planning to disable the bridge before anyone noticed. She was about to pull the last wire when the deck jumped under her boots. The explosion from the lower pipeline ripped through the rig. Sirens wailed, lights flickered and went dark. Instinct took over. She pocketed her tool, tightened her cap, and ran toward the sound of screams. The mission had changed. Now it was about saving the CEO's daughter and everyone else on board. Smoke choked the passageway as she crawled toward the executive suite. Red emergency lights pulsed, and alarms wailed like sirens. She pressed a bandana over her face and kept low, waving panicked workers toward a stairwell. At the bent metal door of the VIP cabin, she heard banging and a faint voice. "Emily," she shouted. "Hang on." The blast had warped the hinges. trapping the door. She wedged her multi-tool into the jamb and shoved with her shoulder. She remembered forcing bulkheads open on a destroyer in the Persian Gulf. Her arms shaking as sailors screamed behind the steel. The metal groaned and gave. A wave of heat rolled over her. Inside, Emily was huddled under a desk, gasping through oily smoke. Her helmet was gone, her hair matted. The woman crawled in, tied her bandana over Emily's mouth, and guided her back out. They dropped to hands and knees and crawled down the corridor. Faces close to the deck where the air was clearer. At the far end a shadow appeared. One of the men in coveralls stood in the strobe light with a pistol pointed at them. His voice lost its fake drawl. "Give me the girl," he barked in a harsh accent. She shoved Emily behind her, scanned the bare corridor, then grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall. Pulling the pin, she sprayed powder into his face. He coughed and fired blindly as she twisted the valve wheel above, blasting him with seawater from a ruptured pipe. He slipped on the wet steel. She seized Emily's hand and darted past him into a side passage, spinning a hatch shut behind them. "He'll be through soon," she whispered. "We need to go." Down a narrow ladder the pump module roared, lit by dim red bulbs. She could feel the vibration of the main shaft through her boots, a reminder that the well beneath them was still flowing. Steam hissed. She clipped a flashlight to her collar and led Emily between pipes and pumps. She swallowed her fear and focused. Every instinct screamed at her to fight. She kept moving. Halfway across, a voice echoed from above. "Stop running. Your father will pay." Another saboteur stood on a catwalk, holding a blue remote. If he reached the detonator, the blowout preventer would fail. She scanned the room. A ladder led to him across an open floor, but a narrow maintenance tunnel ran under the pumps. She pointed. "We're going under. Go first." Emily swallowed and crawled into the dark. The woman followed, pushing her feet. Heat pressed in, and she heard boots above. Foreign voices shouted. There were at least two. She urged Emily faster. The tunnel opened onto a graded platform by the ladder. She hauled Emily up and climbed after. They emerged just as the saboteurs reached the panel. "Stay where you are," one yelled, pointing the device at the controls. The other drew a pistol. She raised her hands, keeping her body between Emily and them. "If you blow the well, none of us will live," she shouted over the roar of machinery. Her eyes darted. A dangling chain, a loose bucket, a hydraulic hose. The chain dangled from a pulley used to hoist equipment. If she swung it at the right moment, it could snag the trigger. Emily clutched her leg, trembling but silent. The saboteurs' faces were set. She had seconds to act. Below, oil roared through pipes. Above, the sky was a strip of gray. She flexed her fingers, ready to lunge. The fate of the rig hung in that fleeting moment. Her eyes locked on the hanging chain. It swayed above a maintenance winch just within reach. The man holding the remote sneered, finger hovering over the detonator, while his partner steadied a pistol. There was no time for finesse. She kicked a loose bucket across the grating. It rattled, and both men flinched. In that heartbeat she lunged, seized the chain, and whipped it. The metal links cracked against the remote, sending it skidding toward the platform edge. A shot rang out, ricocheting off a beam. She flinched but stayed on her feet. The gunman cursed and ran for the fallen device. She cut him off, slamming her shoulder into his ribs. They hit the railing hard. The remote teetered above the drop. He tried to choke her with one hand while grabbing for the chain with the other. She drove her elbow into his jaw, then thrust her knee into his stomach. He let go. The chain slipped through his grasp, and he fell, his shout swallowed by the roar of machines below. The second saboteur lunged for Emily. She scooped up the heavy bucket and hurled it. It smashed his wrist, knocking the pistol away. She followed up with a fist to his temple. He crumpled, dazed. She rolled him over, tore a zip tie from her pocket, and bound his hands to the railing. He spat and cursed in a language she didn't know. Footsteps echoed up the ladder. Others were coming. She grabbed the blinking remote from the floor and stuffed it in her pocket. The control panel for the blowout preventer stood open. Wires exposed where the saboteurs had overridden safety interlocks. She flipped a manual lever to reset and punched in the emergency code she'd memorized from the schematics. Lights on the panel shifted from amber to green. If the remote went off now, the wellhead would still close. Emily clung to her side, trembling. "There may be more," she said calmly. "Stay behind me." If I say run, head to the main deck and wave down anyone in an orange suit. That's the Coast Guard. Emily nodded, eyes wide but determined. Voices drifted from below, men barking orders. Boots clanging on metal. A tremor rippled through the rig as another pump shut down. She thought of her own rules. No names, no attachments. Yet here she was holding a teenager's life in her hands. Saving the girl mattered more than staying invisible. She picked up the fallen pistol and shoved it into her belt. With one hand, she hauled Emily toward the ladder leading up. The path to the control room wound through a jungle of pipes and catwalks. As they climbed, a deeper alarm sounded, a low tone that vibrated through the steel. Gauges on a nearby panel showed pressure climbing. Somewhere, someone was still trying to trigger a blowout. She quickened her pace. At the top of the ladder, they emerged onto a narrow walkway. Steam hissed from ruptured valves, and red strobes painted everything in a sinister light. On one bulkhead, the words "Safety First, Gulf Coast Division" were stenciled under an American flag, now smeared with grease. Emily squeezed her hand tighter. Ahead lay the maze of control rooms and living quarters. Behind them, bound and furious, the surviving saboteur screamed for his comrades. Above, the sky was a strip of gray through vents and gantries. The woman knew the next few minutes would decide the fate of everyone aboard. She drew a deep breath and pushed on, ready to confront whatever waited in the shadows. She hurried along the catwalk, guiding Emily around broken pipes. She passed crew hauling a wounded electrician and asked for the control room. They pointed her up 2 levels and kept moving. Alarms wailed as she climbed. A radio crackled. Deck control. Pressure spike. Who's overriding the preventer? She grabbed the mic. K. Johnson. Manual control engaged. Open the door. After a pause, the latch clicked. Inside, 2 operators stared at her. She held up the remote. Saboteurs bridged your commands. Switch to manual valves and call the Coast Guard. They followed her lead. Gauges stabilized. She told them about the attackers. We can't lock down with the fire alarm, one protested. Then pull the breaker, she said. Turning to Emily, she ordered her to stay put and put on her jacket. As she stepped back into the corridor, she heard the operator send a mayday and the Coast Guard reply with an ETA. Emily stood near the back of the control room, oversized jacket swallowing her frame. She watched the operators flip switches and speak into radios, their faces glistening with sweat. Her hands shook. One operator, the younger one with the Alabama accent, glanced at her. We'll get you out, ma'am, he said softly, trying to sound confident. She nodded, hugging herself. Through a porthole, she could see orange flames and black smoke. She thought of her father and wondered if he knew she was alive. On the open deck, Trevor Marks paced near the starboard lifeboats, life jacket unfastened. Crew tried to guide him to his station, but he bristled. My daughter is still inside, he repeated, voice breaking. A young deckhand said, Sir, you have to trust the safety teams. Trevor stared at the plume of smoke rising from the rig and felt helpless. He pulled out his satellite phone to call the Houston office, but there was no signal. He clenched his fists and whispered a prayer. 40 miles away, on the cutter Resolute, Commander Janice Harper listened to the mayday from Horizon Star. The bridge was a blur of activity. Hellos are spinning up, a petty officer reported. Janice issued orders. Plot intercept course. Alert the aviation unit that sabotage is suspected. We may have hostile actors on board. The cutter turned sharply, engines roaring. 2 orange and white helicopters lifted from the deck, blades chopping the humid air. Pilots checked coordinates. ETA 20 minutes, they radioed. They knew oil rigs could become infernos. Speed was essential. She moved through narrow passageways, pistol drawn. Smoke and steam blurred the corners. Cameras were smashed. Oil slicks made footing treacherous. Ahead, a man in coveralls carried a satchel toward the mud pits. One of the fake contractors. She shadowed him. At a control panel, he fumbled with switches. She stepped out, gun leveled. Dropped the bag. He pulled a flare gun. She rolled as the flare burst against a wall. Flames licked at spilled oil. She tackled him, wrenching the weapon away. The satchel burst open, revealing explosives. He scrambled for a detonator. She head-butted him and slammed his wrist against steel. He sagged. She tore the detonator free and threw it down the stairwell. She tied his hands with a zip tie. There was no time to interrogate. Oil crept toward the fire. She grabbed an extinguisher and doused the flames. A tremor ran through the rig. Her radio crackled, manual valves holding. Coast Guard 5 minutes out. Status. Neutralized another, she replied. She took a steadying breath, looked at the unconscious saboteur and the explosives, and started back toward the control room. Work remained. Back in the control room, she wiped soot from her arm and listened as the operators pointed to a new problem. A secondary choke valve was still open on the lower deck, and pressure was creeping up. I'll get it, she said. She told Emily to stay put and raced down a service ladder. The air grew hotter, smell of crude oil stronger. Above, the thrum of helicopter rotors signaled the Coast Guard's arrival. On the deck, Trevor watched a rescue swimmer drop from an orange and white helicopter. Crew waved him toward the injured. Trevor craned his neck, praying for a glimpse of his daughter. On the cutter Resolute, Commander Harper coordinated the response, sending swimmers and armed boarding teams to the rig and reminding them that saboteurs might still be on board. She reached the valve deck. The manual choke wheel was in sight, but a figure blocked her path. The saboteur she had chained earlier had freed himself. His wrist still bled from the tie. "You can't stop us," he hissed. "Caldwell stole from my clients." She raised her pistol. "Walk away," she warned. He lunged with a pry bar. They grappled on the slick steel, hands slipping in oil. He landed a glancing blow to her shoulder. She fired into his leg. He dropped, cursing. She kicked the bar away, bound his wrists and ankles with a tie, and left him lying on the grate. She threw her weight against the valve. It groaned but began to turn. In the control room, the pressure gauge eased back into the safe zone. The older operator pumped a fist and relayed the news over Channel 16. Emily clutched the jacket the woman had given her and cried softly, relief washing over her. Rescue swimmers in dry suits climbed over the railings and went to work with the rig crew, hauling hoses to extinguish remaining fires and attending to the wounded. A Coast Guard officer took custody of the bound saboteur. Through all the movement, no one paid attention as the woman emerged from below, streaked with grease and sweat. Emily ran to her and threw her arms around her. "You saved us," the girl sobbed. The woman stiffened, then returned the embrace. Trevor arrived, eyes full. "Who are you?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just somebody who owed you." He started to speak, but she stepped away. She walked to a side hatch and descended a maintenance ladder toward a supply boat bobbing at the rig's base. She slipped aboard among the evacuated crew, blending in with their hard hats and coveralls. The Coast Guard commander's voice crackled over loudspeakers, praising the crew and promising a full investigation. News of the sabotage would be sanitized, credits assigned to technology and training. No cameras caught the woman limping down the pier at Port Fourchon hours later. In Houston, reports of the incident began scrolling across financial news tickers. Pundits marveled at the miraculous save and speculated on sabotage. Caldwell sat in a sterile briefing room, his son at his side, watching live feeds of the burning rig and rescue helicopters. He recognized the posture of the person in the background turning a valve, broad shoulders, steady hands, and he smiled faintly. He knew she'd never call. He also knew he still owed her. The woman boarded a shuttle van full of roustabouts bound for a motel. She would be gone before the first press conference. She preferred it that way. Her next mission was already waiting in an encrypted inbox she would soon quietly check again. Caldwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Houston penthouse, watching the skyline glow. The Gulf rig had been extinguished hours ago, but the smell of smoke clung to his memory. On his desk lay the old photograph of him in fatigues, arms slung over a younger woman's shoulder. She looked as she did 15 years ago, broad shoulders, intense eyes, hint of a smile. He traced the edge of the photo, thinking of the call that had tipped her off and the way she had vanished after saving his son. He unlocked a secure terminal and typed a long string of numbers. Somewhere offshore, an account balance grew by 8 figures. "Debt paid," he murmured, though he knew she would never acknowledge it. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown contact. "You have more enemies than you realize. Dubai. Charity gala. 3 days." He frowned. Another threat? Another chance to call in a ghost? On television across America, cable news anchors filled the evening with speculation. Tonight on CNN, a polished host intoned the incredible story of Horizon Star, Officials credit automated safety systems and heroic crew members for averting a catastrophe. But questions remain. Who planted the bombs? Why target Lone Star Petro? Video of helicopters hovering over the smoking rig played on repeat. An analyst said the sabotage bore the hallmarks of state-sponsored industrial espionage and mentioned Russia and China. A Coast Guard spokesperson dodged questions, citing an ongoing investigation. On social media, conspiracy theories bloomed. Some praised the mystery woman rumored to have fought the attackers. Most dismissed her as myth. At a motel off Interstate 10, the woman showered, scrubbing oil and blood from her skin. She put on clean jeans and a t-shirt, then sat on the bed with her laptop. The anonymous account had sent coordinates and a date, a charity gala at the Burj Al Arab in Dubai. The note was terse. Target, TBA. Threat level, high. Compensation, 10 million. She closed the lid. She had never been to Dubai, but she knew its reputation. Glass towers, billionaires, mercenaries. She thought of Caldwell. Had he sent this? Or had her reputation reached too far? She took a deep breath. Her rules remained. No names, no attachments, no recognition. She would fly economy under a false passport, sit in the back, blend in. She walked to a diner next to the motel. The television over the counter displayed footage of the rig. A trucker in a baseball cap said, "AI saved their butts." A waitress replied, "Bless those Coast Guard boys." No one mentioned the woman in gray. She ordered coffee and eggs and paid cash. Her fingers were rough with calluses. Her mind was already on the next job. At the airport 2 days later, she waited in line at the TSA checkpoint under a false name. News screens in the terminal showed Caldwell at a press conference praising American resilience and promising to fund scholarships for families of injured workers. He never mentioned the sabotage. He never mentioned her. She slipped her boarding pass into her jacket. Her flight went from Houston to New York, then to Dubai. She traveled with nothing but a small backpack and the scar on her arm as a reminder. Somewhere over the Atlantic, she opened a paperback and pretended to read while her mind rehearsed floor plans of a 7-star hotel. The game was moving on. She was already in it. Outside her window, dawn broke over the Atlantic, another day in the life of someone who never existed. She smiled to herself briefly. Dubai's airport glittered with glass and marble. She stepped off the plane, used her fake passport and Midwestern accent to breeze through immigration, and walked into a wall of heat. The futuristic skyline looked like something from a comic book. Twisting towers and the sail-shaped Burj Al Arab by the Gulf. She took a taxi to a modest hotel far from the resorts and paid in cash. In her room, she connected to an encrypted site and read the job details. The Al Walid Foundation was hosting a charity gala at the Burj Al Arab for a guest list of CEOs. Royals and Caldwell's rival Malcolm Price. Someone planned an assassination there. She downloaded the hotel's floor plan and watched clips of past galas. Security would be tight with detectors, guards and cameras. She needed access. At dusk, she went to a souk to collect supplies. A boy handed her a fast food bag containing a catering uniform, an ID card with the name Nadia Rahim, a flash drive, and a burner phone. Later the phone rang. A woman told her to enter through Staff Gate 3 at 6 p.m. and warned she would have one chance. The next day, she scouted the hotel, blending in with tourists while noting cameras, guards, and delivery schedules. A catering truck arrived at a side entrance each afternoon. That night, she put on the black trousers and white shirt, clipped on the Nadia badge, and hid the flash drive in her shoe. A scarf covered her hair. She joined a line of staff at the service gate. The guard scanned her ID and waved her through. Inside smelled of onions and bleach. In the locker room, no one looked at her twice. In the kitchen, she plugged the flash drive into a server terminal. Code flashed. It would loop the ballroom cameras for 90 seconds at 8 o'clock. She pocketed the drive and picked up a tray of champagne flutes. The ballroom glittered with crystals and chandeliers. Tuxedos and gowns mingled. She poured drinks and studied faces. Malcolm Price, with his gray hair, laughed with an Emirati chic. She mapped exits and guards. At 7:55 p.m., she passed near the stage and noticed a man in a waiter's jacket whose shoes and posture screamed military. His hand slipped toward his pocket. Her pulse slowed. 5 minutes until the cameras looped. Her window was coming. She remembered training in hotel kitchens during her Navy days. memorizing exits and lines of sight. The Burj made those spaces feel like palaces. Waiters moved in perfect choreography. Any disruption would draw eyes. She calculated distances, 20 feet from her to the man, another 30 to Price. She ran through scenarios in her head. Could the target be the sheik? Or Price, whose company had just beaten Caldwell to a government contract? Price had enemies in Washington and Beijing. She didn't care about corporate wars, but she cared about collateral damage. If she acted too soon, she would expose herself and the loop would be wasted. If she waited too long, someone would die. Her earpiece buzzed faintly. It wasn't connected to anyone. The sound came from her own breathing. She inhaled, exhaled, centered herself. Her heart slowed. At exactly 7:59, she would spill champagne on the man's shoes, apologizing profusely, forcing him to pause. At 8, the cameras would loop, and she would make her move. She checked her watch. 3 minutes. Her grip tightened on the tray. Jazz swelled. Price raised his glass. She edged closer, smiling like a server trained to disappear. She felt ready now. At 7:59 p.m., she lifted her wrist just enough to tilt the tray. Champagne spilled over the assassin's glossy shoes. He jerked back, mouth twisting in annoyance. "Pardon, sir," she exclaimed in broken Arabic, bowing slightly as if mortified. His eyes flicked to her, dismissive. The hotel's ornate clock chimed 8. In the kitchen, a loop of the ballroom feed began to play. For 90 seconds, the cameras would show a harmless, looping scene while real events unfolded unseen. Her free hand slid under her tray and closed around the stun pen. In one smooth motion, she jabbed it into the man's ribcage. His breath hitched. 50,000 volts slammed through him, invisible and silent. His fingers spasmed, the pistol slipping from his grasp. She caught the weapon on the tray and covered it with a napkin. His knees buckled. She caught his elbow to make it look as if she were helping him and guided him toward a curtain behind a marble column. Behind the column, she pressed him against the wall and held the gun to his side. His eyes rolled back into focus. "Why?" she whispered in English. "Who sent you?" He struggled to speak. "Price, traitor, sold code," he rasped. Then, 2 more. Before she could extract more, his eyes rolled back. Whether he fainted or faked, she couldn't tell. She slid him to the floor behind a planter, tucking his hands under his legs. No time to secure him further. The first part of her job was done. The next part was more dangerous. She hid the stun pin back under her tray and walked back into the room as if nothing had happened. The music hadn't stopped. Price still laughed with the sheik. Guests still mingled. Security still looked bored at their posts. Only she and the assassin knew that a gun had been drawn. She scanned the crowd. Where were the other 2? Her eyes caught a man at the edge of the room, wearing a waiter's jacket that hung too stiffly. His shoes were Italian leather, not the cheap slip-resistant kind issued to staff. He slid a hand into his pocket. She moved toward him, weaving through tables, smiling at guests. Her heart rate steadied. She was back in Fallujah, dodging IEDs. She was in Manhattan, disabling a bomb at a hedge fund. She was invisible. On the other side of the world, Caldwell watched a private security feed on his tablet. The gala looked serene. Price was clinking glasses. Caldwell tapped his finger on his armrest. He had told his people not to trust Price, but he hadn't predicted an assassination attempt. He called a number. "We're dark for 90 seconds. A voice replied. "Stay calm." He stared at the screen, hoping she was in position. He owed her more than money. He owed her son's life. Back in the ballroom, she reached the second man just as he raised a lighter. She swung the tray, hitting the lighter from his hand. Champagne glasses shattered. The man swore and lunged at her. She sidestepped, tripped him, and he went down hard. Guests gasped, some laughed, thinking it was a clumsy server. "Excuse me," she said, kneeling as if to help him up. She pressed her thumb against a pressure point on his wrist. Pain shot through him. He grunted. "Who are you?" she whispered. He spat toward the floor and said nothing. She twisted his wrist harder. "Amalfi," he hissed. "Telecom deal." She filed it away. Telecom Price's company had just inked a deal with a Saudi carrier. Rivals would kill for that. Security guards began to move toward her position. She let go of the man's wrist, kicked his ankle to make him yelp again, then stood and apologized to a nearby guest. She melted back into the flow, leaving the guard to deal with the angry waiter. The clock in her head ticked. 40 seconds left on the loop. She still hadn't seen the third assassin. She spotted a man by the sound booth, but he turned and revealed a hotel logo on his shirt. She looked up. A catwalk ringed the ballroom high above. A figure moved in the shadows, crouched near a lighting rig. He wore black, not the white of the stagehands. He held something long and thin, a dark gun, a collapsible rifle. Her stomach clenched. Price and the Sheik stood directly below. She couldn't reach the catwalk in time, but she could cause a scene. She scanned for something to throw. A heavy centerpiece of flowers sat on a nearby table. She grasped the base, lifted with both hands, and heaved it toward the lights. Roses and crystal flew. The centerpiece smashed against a beam. Guests screamed. The figure on the catwalk flinched, lost his balance, and dropped to his knee. The rifle clattered. He scrambled. The loop still ran. 10 seconds left. She sprinted toward the side, door marked service only, heart pounding, calculating her next move. The cameras would be live soon, and the real fight was about to begin. She timed it to the second. At 7:59 p.m., she pivoted and tilted her tray. Golden liquid cascaded over the assassin's polished shoes. He swore and jerked his leg back. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," she gushed in accented Arabic, lowering her head. He glanced at her for a heartbeat, annoyance flashing across his features. In that instant, the clock struck 8. The loop she'd planted took effect. Ballroom cameras switched to a pre-recorded feed showing waiters circulating and guests laughing. Real-time disappeared for 90 seconds. Her left hand slid under her tray and closed on the stun pin hidden beneath. She jabbed the device into the man's ribcage and pressed the button. 50,000 volts jolted through his body. His eyes widened, then rolled back. He stiffened, the pistol dropping from his fingers onto the carpet. She caught it with her tray hand and slipped it beneath the white cloth. To any onlooker, she was simply helping a clumsy waiter. "Please, sir, let me help you clean up," she said, guiding him toward a shadow behind a pillar. Behind the pillar, she pinned him against the marble and pressed the barrel under his jaw. His dark eyes stared into hers, clearing as the shock faded. "Who sent you?" she whispered. He clenched his jaw. "Too late," he hissed. "There are 2 more. She head-butted him into unconsciousness, slid the gun into her waistband, and lowered him carefully behind a potted palm. There was no time to secure him further. She walked back into the flow, tray held high, eyes scanning the crowd. She spotted another waiter's jacket with the same expensive shoes near the sound booth. The man's hand hovered near a control panel. 30 seconds left. She approached from his blind side. He lifted a cigarette lighter, flicking it once, twice. She swung her tray in a sweeping arc, smashing the lighter from his grip. Champagne glasses flew. Guests gasped. "Watch it," someone barked. She ignored them, driving her elbow into the waiter's solar plexus. He doubled over. She grabbed his arm, twisted, and felt something give. His face contorted in pain. Security began to move, drawn by the commotion. She shoved him toward them, shouting in Arabic, "He's armed." Guards converged, radios crackling. She kept moving. 10 seconds left. Where was the third? Her eyes darted. Near the stage, a man in a dark suit reached into his jacket. She couldn't get there in time. Then a tall waiter stepped between them, spilling a tray of hors d'oeuvres. The man with the suit paused, annoyed. 2 guards seized him, saw the weapon, and tackled him. The cameras flicked back to life. Guests murmured, confused by the sudden flurry of activity. Malcolm Price frowned, his laughter replaced by suspicion. A master of ceremonies took the microphone and announced an unscheduled intermission. Music swelled louder to cover the disruption. She disappeared into the kitchen, dropped the stolen pistol into a pot of stock simmering on a stove, and headed for the staff exit. Outside, night air hit her like a wave. She slipped into a line of staff taking smoke breaks. No one stopped her. Sirens wailed in the distance. She imagined Dubai police racing toward the hotel. Her phone vibrated. A text from the anonymous number. "Job complete. Payment processed. Exville South Side." She walked toward the loading dock, ducked behind a stack of crates, and climbed into the back of a delivery van. The door slid shut. The van moved. 20 minutes later, she was back in her hotel room, peeling off the catering uniform. Her hands shook slightly as adrenaline ebbed. She washed her face and stared at herself in the mirror. Another mission done. Another name she'd never know saved. Her phone buzzed again. An email from Caldwell's encrypted address. "Thank you. Take time off. We'll be in touch." She smiled without humor. She opened her secure laptop and checked the offshore account. $10 million had been wired. She powered down the computer, packed her bag, and walked out. The desert night was quiet. The city lights bright. She hailed a taxi to the airport. The driver asked where she was going. Home, she said. He nodded and pulled away. She didn't know where home was anymore. But she knew she wouldn't stay long. In a week, there would be another message, another threat, another unseen fight. She would answer, because it was all she knew. 2 nights after the gala, Malcolm Price sat across from Marcus Caldwell in a private lounge at the Emirates Tower, an untouched scotch in front of each. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the Burj Khalifa rising through the haze. Security men paced discreetly outside. Price's smile was tight. That was quite a show at the gala, he said. Fireworks and a few clumsy waiters. Dubai police say no one was injured. Caldwell swirled his glass and watched the amber liquid catch the light. And yet your shoes got damp, he replied. Price's eyes narrowed. If you're implying I staged an attack on myself, save it. My company was the target. Someone doesn't like us expanding into the Gulf. Caldwell leaned forward. Someone doesn't like you beating me to a government quantum contract. For a heartbeat, the air felt charged. Then Price laughed. Business is war, Marcus. But I don't kill my rivals' children. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Neither do I. They clinked glasses. Each filed away new lines on a growing ledger of grievances. In an interrogation room at a Dubai police compound, 2 captured saboteurs sat under fluorescent lights. An Emirati detective, flanked by an FBI liaison flown in from Washington, slid photos across the table. Who paid you? The younger man, with a bandaged wrist, stared at his hands. Jobs board on the dark web, he said in Russian-accented English. We never see faces. We get crypto. We deliver. The older man, leg in a cast, looked at the wall. Code name Amalfi, he muttered. Telecom project. American target. The FBI agent's eyes flicked up. Amalfi matched chatter about an Italian tech broker working for a Chinese front. The detective leaned in. Who else was involved? The men shook their heads. A woman in the kitchen. The older one said. Big. Quick. She shocked Victor. She wasn't with us. The agent scribbled. Unknown female operative. Assisted target. Another ghost story for his file. He'd heard rumors from Gulfstream 700 passengers. He'd tell Langley. He wondered if she was MI6, CIA, or something else. Hundreds of miles away. The woman sat on a plastic chair in a rented room above a garage in Muscat, Oman. The air smelled of diesel and spices. She had taken the overnight bus from Dubai to avoid airports and had paid for the room in cash. On the table lay the phone from Dubai, dismantled, its SIM card snapped. Her laptop screen showed an offshore account balance with a new line entry. She closed the lid. She opened a small tin and pulled out a photograph, the same photo Caldwell kept in his safe. Only this copy was creased and stained. She ran her thumb over the young Caldwell's face. Still alive, she murmured, half to herself, half to the ghosts of her fallen team. Her email pinged. A new message popped up. Romart Fair. VIP guest, Italian defense minister. Rumors of kidnapping plot. Interested? There was no signature. She smiled without humor. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She should rest. She should walk away. She clicked reply. What's the fee? Back in Houston, Caldwell faced his board. Directors demanded answers about the Horizon Star and Dubai. Stock had dipped. We're cooperating fully with authorities, Caldwell assured them. Sabotage by foreign competitors. We've increased security. Our AI saved lives. A director asked, what about price? Are we at war? Caldwell stared out at the Houston skyline. We've always been at war, he thought but did not say. Aloud, he said, we'll diversify. And we'll be prepared. After the meeting, he called his head of security. Find out who leaked the gala details, he ordered. And double the usual payment to our friend. We don't know how to reach her, the man protested. Caldwell's eyes flashed. She'll find us. In a small apartment in Virginia. Emily Caldwell sat at her desk, drawing. Her sketchbook was filled with charcoal portraits. Her father, the Gulfstream jet, a woman in a cap with kind eyes. She heard voices on the news talking about heroes and algorithms. She closed the book and slid it under her pillow. She would keep the memory of the woman on the plane. And the woman she never saw in Dubai, to herself. Her father had told her that some heroes never want to be known. She understood. Far above the Atlantic, a long-range business jet cut through the night, its destination Rome. In the cabin, a man in a tailored suit sipped espresso and read an intelligence briefing on his tablet. The briefing mentioned the Dubai Gala incident, linked to Amalfi and an unknown operative. He looked at his reflection in the dark window and smiled. On to the next move, he whispered. The woman slept in Muscat, boots by her bed, passport under her pillow. In a day or two, she would fly to Rome under another name. The game continued, each player moving pieces in shadows. She did not know who wrote the rules. She only knew she could never stop playing. The Fiumicino airport in Rome smelled of espresso and jet fuel. She stepped off a crowded flight from Muscat. Her hair dyed chestnut and cut shorter, her passport now bearing the name Elena Marini with an Italian birth city and the stamp of a Los Angeles visa. She spoke Italian with enough Sicilian lilt to fool passport control. They waved her through. Outside, taxi drivers shouted destinations. She chose a black Mercedes sedan with an official taxi sign and showed the driver an address in Trastevere. Cobblestone streets and ochre buildings slid past as the car crossed the Tiber. Scooter riders wove between cars, horns honked, and church bells chimed. She kept one eye on the mirror. The apartment she'd rented was on the top floor of a building near Piazza Santa Maria. She climbed narrow stairs, unlocked 3 locks, and entered a room with a single bed, a kitchen table, and a small balcony. From her window, she could see the dome of St. Peter's glittering in the distance. She hung her bag and pulled out her laptop. The email from the anonymous account gave her 12 hours before the opening of the Roma Artissima, a charity art fair hosted in the Palazzo Barberini. The VIP guest list included an Italian defense minister known for anti-corruption crusades, several tech CEOs, and a Hollywood actor. Rumor of a kidnapping plot accompanied the note. She traced the IP addresses of the email. They bounced around servers in Switzerland and Panama. She encrypted a reply. How many threats? Any inside contacts? The response, 3 individuals. 1 already in Rome. 1 arriving on private flight. 3rd, unknown. Contact at cafe. She showered and changed into a white blouse and jeans. On her way out, she stopped at a tabacchi to buy a SIM card and recharge. In the cafe specified by the message, a small bar near Piazza Navona with faded frescoes on the walls, she ordered an espresso and a cornetto. A woman in her 60s with a cigarette and a thick stack of newspapers looked up. Say, Elena? She asked under her breath. The woman nodded, slid a newspaper across the table, and tapped the classifieds. Inside was a laminated badge with Artissima staff and a lanyard. Badge scans chip, the woman whispered. Doors on side streets open with staff cards. You'll find the rest under your chair. Under the chair, taped with clear tape, was an envelope containing a floor plan of the palazzo, a small spray bottle of clear liquid, and a folded business card. The card read, in English, in case of emergency, call this number, with a +39 Italian prefix. She memorized it and burned the card outside with her lighter. Elsewhere in Rome, the man from the business jet strode into a rented villa near Via Appia. He tossed his jacket onto a chair. 2 men and a woman waited. We have 3 targets, he said in Italian. The minister, the American CEO, and the actress. Our friend in the Gulf failed. We will not. The gala begins at 1900. He outlined the plan. 1 team disguised as security would usher the targets through a side exit where a van waited. The 2nd team would cut the CCTV feed from the control room. The 3rd team, him, would coordinate and deal with any interference. He did not know that interference had already landed. Caldwell, back in Houston, watched a live Bloomberg interview with Malcolm Price and the Italian minister. They shook hands and announced a joint cybersecurity initiative. Caldwell's jaw clenched. He dialed a secure line. We may have another problem, he told the voice on the other end. Our friend is in Rome. The voice answered, we'll monitor. If things go sideways, she's on her own. Caldwell hung up. He hated these games, but knew he had no choice. He clicked open an old email folder and reread the 1-line message Nyasha had sent him in Kandahar years ago. Oh, you won. He sighed and closed it. That afternoon, she walked around the Palazzo Barberini's exterior, noting the service entrances, the position of security cameras, and the staging of tents and temporary walls for the fair. Uniformed carabinieri stood at corners. Workers rolled in paintings and sculptures. She counted guards and took photos with her phone like any tourist. Inside, she knew, were marble halls with painted ceilings, a double staircase, and numerous hiding places. She returned to her apartment to rest for an hour, then donned the Artissima badge, tied her hair back, and headed out at dusk. Guests arrived in black cars and polished shoes. She slipped in through a service door, nodded to a guard, and took up a position by the side of the central salon. When the defense minister arrived, cheers rose. Cameras flashed. She watched as the man from the villa took up a spot near the emergency exit, hand on his earpiece. Her spray bottle contained a mild acid that, when sprayed on a badge reader, would cause a short. She waited for her window and thought about the number burned into her memory. Rome had never seen someone like her. She would make sure it stayed that way. The Palazzo Barberini's grand salon was a swirl of couture and cell phones. Waiters delivered Prosecco, donors admired Renaissance canvases, and security personnel scanned with practiced boredom. She kept to the shadows near the side exit, watching the man from the villa adjust his earpiece and glance at his watch. His hand hovered near the card reader. The defense minister stood on a small platform, greeting patrons and smiling for photographers. Malcolm Price chatted with an Italian curator about blockchain art. The Hollywood actress signed autographs. Everything looked normal, but she felt the tension like static in the air. At 1910, the villa man pressed his badge to the reader. The light turned green, the lock clicked, and the door opened a fraction. He held it, gesturing subtly. Two men in black suits moved toward him, each flanking a target, the minister and Price. She took a breath, stepped behind him, and sprayed the clear liquid onto the reader and the hinge. The acid hissed softly. The indicator light blinked red. A thin wisp of smoke rose. The lock jammed. The door wouldn't budge. He pushed harder, frowning. One of his accomplices swore under his breath. "Che succeed?" someone asked. "System error," she said in Italian, faking concern. "Call maintenance." She pressed her palm against a sensor and shrugged theatrically when it refused to respond. The delay bought seconds. The villa man spun toward her, suspicion in his eyes. He reached inside his jacket. She let her tray fall. Metal clattered, drawing gasps. In the same motion, she drove her elbow into his sternum. Air exploded from his lungs. His hand came out with a silenced pistol. She caught his wrist, twisted, and heard tendons strain. The weapon slipped to the marble floor. She kicked it under a table draped in linen. The second kidnapper grabbed the minister's arm and yanked him toward the jammed door. The minister stumbled. His security detail shouted and lunged. Price stepped back, eyes widening. Someone screamed. Music screeched to a halt. The third accomplice, the woman from the villa team, stepped from the crowd with a stun baton. She swung at the actress, but hit a bronze sculpture instead. Sparks flew. The smell of ozone filled the room. The actress ducked and fled. The woman with the baton pivoted toward her. She grabbed a silver serving tray and used it as a shield. The baton crackled against the metal. She felt the jolt travel up her arms, but held firm. She bashed the attacker's hand. The baton clanged to the floor. She swept the woman's legs. The attacker fell onto priceless marble, the sound echoing. Carabinieri in ceremonial uniforms dropped the pageantry and surged forward. One tackled the second kidnapper, driving him into a wall. Another pinned the woman with the baton. The villa man broke her grip and bolted through the kitchen. She hesitated. Chasing him would blow her cover completely. She let him go. The minister's detail hustled him away, Price close behind. Guests murmured. Staff apologized. A voice over the public address system announced an unexpected technical issue and urged everyone to enjoy the buffet in the garden. She picked up broken glass and placed it on her tray, playing the role to the end. In the confusion, few noticed her slip through the staff corridor and out into the night. She circled the building to the side street where mopeds buzzed and teenagers smoked. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Payment transferred. Stand by. She exhaled and walked toward the Tiber, blending into a group of tourists. In Houston the next morning, Caldwell watched a news segment about a near incident at an art fair in Rome. The minister was unharmed, the report said. A security glitch had triggered an alarm. No mention of a thwarted kidnapping. No mention of Price. Caldwell's mouth tightened. The game was getting messier. He forwarded the article to his head of security with a single word: watch. In a dim villa, The man from the failed snatch threw a wine glass across the room. "Who is she?" he shouted. His associate shrugged. "A ghost," he said. The man slammed his fist on the table. "Find her," he ordered. "No more mistakes." He stared at a painting on the wall without seeing it. This wasn't over. She returned to her Trastevere apartment, peeled off the uniform, and tossed it into a trash bag. She checked her offshore account. The number had grown again. She made a note of the emergency phone number she'd burned and searched it in her head. Unknown. She packed her bag. Rome had been saved, but she couldn't stay. There were always new enemies. New plots. New rooms full of people who never knew she'd been there. She stepped onto her balcony, breathed in the scent of basil and exhaust, and smiled faintly. Another city. Another victory. Another departure at dawn.